My wife died 8 years ago. For the first 2 years after she died, I talked to her every night. Not always out loud. Sometimes just in my head, sitting on the back porch after supper, watching the light go out of the ridge line over East Tennessee. I would tell her about my day, what I had read, what I had for lunch, the things that made me think of her, which was most things. Most of the time. I told her about the book I was working through. I told her about the bird that had started coming to the feeder she bought the year before she got sick. A red-bellied woodpecker, bold as anything, not afraid of me at all. I told her I was sorry for things I had not said while she was still here. The small things, the ones that do not seem worth saying until it is too late to say them. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I believed she could hear me, not metaphorically, not as a coping mechanism I had consciously chosen to adopt. I believed. The way you believe that the chair you are sitting in will hold you, the way you believe the sun will come back tomorrow morning, that she was somewhere, and that what I said reached her. I believed that because I had believed it my whole life. I believed it because my church told me it was true. I believed it because the alternative, that she was simply gone, completely and permanently, into a silence that does not have an address, was something I could not stand to look at directly. So I did not look at it. I looked at the ridgeline instead, and I talked, and I believed she was there. That ended gradually, and then all at once. And I have never, not once, in the 4 years since it ended, said out loud what it actually cost me. Not because it is shameful. Lord knows I have said harder things on this channel. I have named beliefs I held for 50 years and shown you exactly where they came from and why I can no longer hold them. That kind of honesty does not frighten me anymore. This one is different. Because saying this out loud makes it final. Stay with me. Before I go any further, and I need to go further, because I have been carrying this particular weight for 4 years and I am done carrying it alone. If this kind of conversation is the reason you found this channel, hit subscribe. The algorithm does not surface this content on its own. It needs people like you to tell it that this matters, and I have more of these conversations to have. Let me back up a little, because I need to tell you the full version of my deconstruction, not the shortened one. The version I usually tell is this. I grew up Southern Baptist in East Tennessee, deacon for 22 years. After my wife passed, I started reading the Bible more carefully, looking for comfort, and finding instead things I could not explain. I found a used copy of Spinoza's Tractatus Theologico-Politicus at a garage sale. Read it over one summer at the public library, cross-referencing against modern biblical scholarship. And one afternoon in that library, something came undone in me that I could not put back together. That version is true. Every word of it is true. What it leaves out is what I was doing on the side while all of that was happening. While my faith was coming apart. While I was sitting in that library reading things that should have settled like ash but kept catching fire, I was doing something very deliberate with one particular belief. I was holding it separately, setting it aside, not subjecting it to the same scrutiny I was applying to everything else. The documentary hypothesis, the contradictions in the Gospels, the history of the biblical canon, I was picking those up, turning them over in the light, asking hard questions, following the evidence wherever it led. And then I was setting that one belief gently down, like something made of very thin glass, and not touching it. The belief that my wife was somewhere, that there was a place. I did not have a precise picture of it. The Sunday school images had worn thin decades ago. But that there was a place, and she was in it, and that one day I would be in it too, and I would see her again, I noticed, even while it was happening, that I was not applying the same standard to that belief that I was applying to everything else. I told myself it was because I had not gotten to it yet. I was working through things in order, and I would get there when I got there. But I knew. The way you know when you are not being fully honest with yourself? It sits differently. It has a different weight. I knew what I was doing, and I kept doing it. Here is the thing about grief that I do not think people who have not been inside it fully understand. When you have lost someone, I mean really lost them, someone you slept next to for 31 years, someone whose voice still lives in the rooms of your house, someone whose habits you know better than your own. Belief in heaven is not a theological position. It is not a doctrine you hold because you evaluated the evidence and found it convincing. It is the place where they still exist. As long as you believe in that place, the person is not completely gone. There is still a thread, still a destination, still a geography, however vague, where the specific fact of that person, their voice, the way they laughed, the particular look they had when they thought you were being foolish but would not say so directly, still has a location. I want to be honest about what I was doing when I protected that belief from the questions I was asking everything else. I was not being intellectually inconsistent out of laziness. Or I was, but that was not the primary reason. The primary reason was this. I was not ready to lose her a second time, because that is what losing that belief would mean. I could feel it, even before I could name it. Losing the belief in where she was, that was not the same as losing a doctrine about the afterlife in the abstract. That was losing her. So I held the belief for as long as I could hold it. And I want to tell you something else that I have read in message after message from people in this community, something I recognize from the inside. I was not alone in this. Not by a long way. Someone wrote to me last year. They asked me not to share the details, so I will not. But the substance was this. Her mother had died 3 years before she started deconstructing. She had carried the grief of that death inside the container of her faith, the absolute certainty, not as metaphor but as lived reality, that her mother was somewhere, that she was at peace, that she could still hear her when she prayed. That certainty had held the grief in a shape she could manage. And then the faith came apart. Not all at once, slowly, the way a wall comes apart when the foundation shifts. A crack here, a crack there, until one morning you see that the whole structure has been moving. And she said, I did not just lose my belief in heaven. I lost her again, a second time. Worse than the first, because the first time I had the promise to hold on to. This time I had nothing. She said, I have not told anyone this. My family is still Christian. If I say this out loud, they will think I am blaming my mother for my crisis of faith. I want to stop on that for a moment. You are not blaming her. What you are describing, what I was living through on those evenings on the porch, what hundreds of people in this community are carrying quietly, is one of the loneliest and most under-acknowledged griefs in the entire experience of leaving religion. Some researchers who work with people in religious deconstruction call it double bereavement. You lose the person, and then, sometimes years later, sometimes at the very same time, you lose the last place where they still existed. 2 deaths. 1 person. The first grief you thought you had processed starts all over again, but this time without the comfort that got you through the first time. Marlene Winnell, who wrote what I consider the most honest book about the psychological cost of leaving authoritarian religion, Leaving the Fold, published in 1993, Long before most of this community had any name for what it was going through, she wrote that the loss of afterlife certainty is one of the most painful and least acknowledged aspects of religious deconstruction. Not the loss of the doctrine of biblical inerrancy, not the loss of the historical claims, the loss of the place where the dead still lived. I read that book about a year and a half after my own belief in heaven had quietly ended, and I sat with that paragraph for a very long time. Not because it told me something new, because it told me someone else had seen it. Now here is the thing that most people in this situation do not tell anyone. There is a second layer to this particular grief that is even harder to carry, and it is the public performance of belief after the belief is gone. I know what it is like to sit at a graveside service, not my wife's. She went before my deconstruction was complete, and I still believed at her funeral, and I am genuinely grateful for that. But other graveside services, friends and neighbors, and people I had known for decades, and to hear someone say she is in a better place now. He is with the Lord. They are finally home. And to stand there and nod. Because what are you going to say? You are not going to say, actually, I am not sure that is true anymore. You are not going to say, I have been reading some things, and I am not certain there is a better place, and I am not sure what I believe about the Lord. And the word home has stopped meaning what it used to mean when I apply it to the dead. You are not going to say any of that. You are standing at a grave, surrounded by people in genuine grief, and the kindest thing you can do is hold their certainty with them even when you no longer share it. And so you nod, and you shake hands, and you say, I know they are at peace. Or you say nothing at all, just squeeze the arm of whoever is beside you, which means the same thing without the words. And you drive home alone afterward. And you carry that alone. What I want you to hear is this. The aloneness of that particular experience, deconstructing while grieving, or grieving while deconstructing, when those two things are happening at the same time and you cannot separate them, that aloneness is real. It is not a failure of community. It is not something you could have prevented by choosing different friends or a different family. It is the structural situation of someone whose internal world has shifted while their external world has not, and who does not have the vocabulary yet or the safety to say so. That is not your fault. I want to tell you about a Sunday afternoon in October, about 8 or 9 months after I had stopped believing my wife was anywhere. And I want to say it that plainly, because I think the plainness is part of what has to be said. I drove to the cemetery. I had not been there in a while. That itself was new. When I still believed, I went regularly. I would stand at the grave and talk, tell her what I had been reading, what I had noticed that week, what I was still working through. And I would feel something. Not a voice I heard. More like a presence. The sense that what I said was going somewhere other than just the air. That Sunday in October, I drove out there, and I stood at the marker with her name on it, and I tried. I could not do it. Not because I did not want to. I have wanted very few things in my life as badly as I wanted to be able to stand at that grave and believe she could hear me. It was that I could not make myself believe, even for the span of a single conversation, that what I said was going anywhere, that there was a there to go to. I stood there for about 10 minutes, and then I got back in the truck, sitting in the driveway at home, engine off, key in my hand. I thought something I have not said out loud to anyone until right now. I thought, what if I just went back? I want to say that clearly because I suspect some of you have had this exact thought and are carrying some measure of shame about it. The thought was not complicated. What if I just let myself believe it again? Not all of it. Not the whole structure. Not the things I had already looked at directly and could no longer look away from. Just that. Just the one piece. Just the belief that she was somewhere and that I would see her again. What would it cost me to let myself have that? I sat in that truck for a long time. I could not do it. Not because I was too proud, not because the label I had started to put on myself mattered more to me than she did. It was simpler and harder than that. I could not make myself believe something I did not believe. You cannot choose to believe the way you choose to stand up or sit down. You can choose to act as if. You can choose to practice. But I had tried that for months already, quietly, on the side, while the rest of my deconstruction was happening around it. The door was already closed, and sitting in that truck, I understood for the first time what it had actually cost me when it closed. I almost did not make this video. I want to be honest about that too. I started it 4 different times over the past 2 years, and 4 different times I got to a certain point and stopped, not because I could not find the words exactly, because finding the words meant the thing was real, and as long as I had not put words to it, it was still a little bit unfinished. Still a little bit in motion. Still something that could maybe resolve differently, but it is not going to resolve differently. 4 years is long enough to know that. And there is something else. The longer I stayed quiet about it, the more I was doing to the people in this community who are carrying the same thing. Keeping silent about a grief does not make it smaller. It makes it lonelier. And if there is one thing I have learned from the messages that come through this channel, from the people writing at 2 in the morning about the person they lost and the faith they are losing, it is that loneliness is not a symptom of deconstruction. It is the most common wound. And the only thing that has ever helped a wound of that kind, in my experience, is knowing that somebody else has had it. And there are too many people in this community carrying this in silence for me to keep staying quiet about it. Here is what I understood, sitting in that truck. I did not just lose my faith in heaven. I lost the version of myself that could still believe I would see her again. That specific thing. Not a doctrine about the afterlife in general terms. The personal, named, irreplaceable belief that one day, in some form I could not picture exactly, but that I trusted as real, I would see her face again. I would hear her voice again. The specific, particular person she was would still exist somewhere, and I would reach it. That is what I lost. And here is the thing I had not understood before that afternoon in the truck. The thing I had been, without fully knowing it, protecting myself from understanding. I did not know, until it was gone, how much of my faith had been her. Not all of it. Not from the beginning, but a very large portion of what had survived the library, survived the Spinoza, survived the months of reading and sitting with things I could not explain away. That portion had survived because of her. I had held it separately. I had not examined it, because to examine it was to risk losing the last place she still existed. James Fowler, a developmental psychologist who spent his career studying how faith changes across a human life, he wrote a book called Stages of Faith in 1981 that I did not encounter until several years into my own deconstruction. He describes what he calls Stage 4, the period in which inherited beliefs stop working and have to be confronted directly. He notes, carefully, that this transition is especially painful when it coincides with a significant loss, because the very belief system you would normally reach for to help you carry that loss is the one being dismantled at the same time. That is precise. That is exactly what happened to me. And to the woman who wrote me about her mother. And to more people in this community than I can count. But there is something underneath that observation that I find even more honest than the framework itself, something that psychologists have documented across decades of research without framing it in religious terms at all. The observation is this: human beings, when confronted with the reality of death, cling more tightly to the worldviews that promise continuity after it, not primarily for their own deaths, mostly for the people they have already lost. The comfort of heaven was never primarily about fear of your own death. It was about the people who were already gone. It was about making their deaths not final. I knew this on some level for years before I could say it. I knew that my belief in heaven was doing something for me that went beyond theology. It was keeping her alive. Not literally. I was not delusional. I knew she was not coming back in any ordinary sense, but it was keeping her located. It was giving death a temporary quality. She had crossed a threshold. The threshold was real. The pain of it was real. But it was not the last word. There was a next thing, and we would both be in it. When I stopped being able to believe that, the death became final. And the grief that had been held in the shape of temporary loss suddenly had to hold itself in the shape of permanent loss. That is a very different shape. I want to be specific about what I mean, because I think the difference is important. The grief I carried in the first 2 years after her death, the grief inside the faith, had a quality of suspension to it. The loss was real. The pain was real. There was not a day that went by that I did not feel the full weight of her absence. But underneath the weight, there was always a kind of, I am reaching for the right word here, a kind of structural below, a foundation, the belief that the absence was not the final state, that the story was not over, that somewhere on the other side of whatever this was, there was still her. That foundation is what gave the grief its shape. It made it a grief with a temporary quality. Not easy. Nothing about grief is easy, and anyone who tells you otherwise has either not lost anyone who truly mattered or has not been honest with themselves about it. But temporary, bearable, in the way that pain is bearable when you believe it will eventually end. When I stopped believing the foundation was real, the grief lost its floor. And the thing I was not prepared for, the thing I do not think anyone warns you about, because not many people talk about it, because the intersection of grief and deconstruction is still largely a private experience that people carry alone, is that it did not just change the texture of how I felt in the present. It changed how I felt about everything that had already happened. Those 2 years of talking to her on the porch, those evenings with the woodpecker at the feeder, and the light going out over the ridge, the feeling of being heard, the feeling that what I said was going somewhere. All of that took on a different quality once I stopped believing it had been going anywhere. Not worthless. That's not the right word, and I want to be careful here, because I think it matters. Not an illusion in the sense of being made up or false. The love was real. The talking was real. The comfort I felt was real. But the destination I had believed I was sending it to, that part was something I had built myself, or inherited and held, and it was not what I had thought it was. I am still working out how to carry that. Here is what the price of this actually was. Not the loss of a doctrine. I had lost doctrines before, and it hurt in a specific way, and then I learned to carry what I had learned. Doctrines are claims about the world. You examine them, find out they do not hold up, set them down. Painful, disorienting, but manageable. This was not a doctrine. This was the version of Howard who could still believe he would see her. That Howard, the one who sat on the back porch in the evenings and felt heard when he talked into the dark, who stood at a grave and felt the presence of someone still there on the other side of something, who got through the hardest nights partly on the belief that they were not permanent. That version of me is gone. I do not know exactly when he ended. That is one of the strange things about this kind of loss. There was no single afternoon in the library, no book I closed that closed something else. There was just the slow, quiet collapse of something I had been holding together by not looking at it too hard. And then there was that Sunday in October when I understood it was already over. And I want to say something about what it feels like to carry that. It is not despair. I want to be clear about that, because I think some of you are afraid that this is where this story ends, in a place where the grief has nowhere to go and nothing to hold it. That is not where I am. That is not where most people in this situation end up, in my experience of this community. But it is a particular kind of loneliness that I did not have language for until recently. There is a grief that the religious tradition I came from had a container for. It had liturgy and ceremony and language and the absolute insistence that death was not the end. When my wife died, that container caught the grief and gave it a shape. The shape was bearable. There was a narrative. She had gone ahead, and I would follow, and the separation was real but temporary. When I stopped believing the narrative, the container dissolved, and the grief had to find a new shape. The grief did not change. It was still exactly what it was. The specific, irreplaceable loss of the specific, irreplaceable person. But the shape changed entirely. And learning to hold grief in a new shape, without any of the equipment you were given for it, is one of the loneliest things I know how to describe. The thing I had never said out loud before tonight was not just what I lost. It was that I lost the version of myself that could still use the equipment. That Howard, on the porch in the evenings, talking, believing she could hear. He is gone too. Saying that out loud is what makes it final. I want to come back to something I said at the very beginning. I said I talked to her every night, for 2 years, that I believed she could hear me, that I looked at the ridge line instead of looking at the silence. I still sit on that porch. The chair is still there. I did not move it. I am not entirely sure why. Maybe for the same reason, I still sometimes catch myself about to say something to her before I remember. Maybe for the same reason, I still, on some evenings, sit out there long after it gets dark. Not talking now, just sitting. In the place where I used to feel something I cannot feel anymore. I do not feel that presence anymore. I want to be honest about that, without making it sound like a tragedy I am performing for you. The presence I felt, the sense that what I said was going somewhere. I think now that it was real, but I think it was inside me. It was my love for her finding a form. It was the mind doing what minds do, which is to keep the people who matter alive in us, to continue the relationship past the point where the other person can continue it with you. That is not nothing. I want to say that clearly. The feeling was real. What it told me about the external world was not accurate, but the love itself, the continued, daily, irreducible reality of who she was to me, that was not an illusion. That was just love outlasting the person it was attached to. And here is something that surprised me, something I did not expect to find on the other side of that October Sunday, when I stopped directing my love toward a location, when there was no longer a somewhere to send it. The love did not go away. It just had nowhere to go except back into the memory of who she actually was, the specific, detailed, imperfect, familiar 31-year reality of her. And I found, this is the part I did not expect, that I could remember her more clearly once I stopped needing her to be somewhere. When I believed she was somewhere, my memory of her was always slightly in service of that belief. I was half remembering her and half sustaining a felt sense of presence, keeping something going. Those are not quite the same as just remembering. What I have now is just her, the exact person she was, without the additional layer of projection onto a place I no longer believe exists. The specific way she said my name when she was not annoyed but was thinking about becoming annoyed. The particular expression she had when I was reading something, and she knew I had been reading for too long. The way she could end an argument just by going quiet. Not sulking, just choosing to let it go, which was always more disarming than anything she might have said. I have those now, without the theology attached to them. That is something. I would not have chosen it. Given any real choice in the matter, I would have kept the belief. I would have kept the porch conversations. I would have kept the feeling in the evenings that she was somewhere and that what I said reached her. But I did not get to choose. And what I have instead is not nothing. I want to say something to the people who are sitting in the place I was sitting 4 or 5 years ago, because I think there are more of you watching this right now than I could count, and most of you have never said this out loud to anyone. You lost someone. Maybe a parent. Maybe a spouse. Maybe, God, I hope not, but I know some of you are carrying this. A child. And then your faith started to come apart, and somewhere in the middle of that, you realized that the very belief that had helped you carry the death was one of the beliefs you were losing. And you have been afraid to say so out loud, because you are worried people will think you are making this about yourself. That you are turning your own spiritual crisis into the main story when the person you loved should be the main story. Here is what I want you to hear. You are not making this about yourself. This is not vanity or weakness or selfishness. This is what happens when the theological container for grief is the same container that is dissolving in your hands. You cannot carry grief and deconstruct the container for grief at the same time without it costing you something real. What you are carrying is real. It is one of the most under-acknowledged griefs in the entire landscape of faith deconstruction, and the fact that it does not have a name in most communities does not mean it is not happening to thousands of people at once. You are not alone in this. I am not saying that as a comfort phrase. I am saying it because I have the evidence. It shows up in the comments of this channel. It shows up in my messages. It shows up in emails that start at 2 in the morning and end without a clear conclusion, because there is not a clear conclusion to give. Before I give you the last piece of this is the first video I have made where there was no research to do, no library, no cross-referencing, no sources to track down. Just this, sitting here, trying to find the words for something I have been carrying since that Sunday in October, 4 years ago, in a truck in my own driveway. If this kind of honesty matters to you, if this channel has been a place where something you were carrying alone got named, the super thanks button is the most direct way to tell me that. I want to be honest about what it means for this work. It is what makes it possible for me to keep showing up. Not just for you, but for the 18 versions of myself I was before this one, who needed someone to say these things and could not find anyone who would. I do not know where she is. I do not think I will ever know. And some days, more days than I would like to admit, if I am being completely honest with you, that is the loneliest thing I have ever believed. But here is where I am, 4 years on from that Sunday afternoon. I can grieve her without the promise. I can love her without the doctrine. What I feel for her does not need a heaven to be real. It does not need a destination to qualify as love. The 31 years we had, the specific weight and texture and reality of those 31 years, those are not diminished by what I no longer believe about what came after them. That took me a long time to get to. I am not going to pretend it came easily or quickly, or without a lot of dark evenings on that porch where I honestly did not know if I was going to be able to carry it. But I got there. And if you are sitting where I was sitting, if you have lost someone, and you are now losing the only place where they still existed for you, and you are afraid that the loss of the belief means the loss of the person, I want you to hear this. It does not. The love outlasts the theology. It does not go where I used to think it went, but it is still here, on the porch, in the chair I have not moved, in the way I still look at the ridgeline sometimes in the evenings, not talking, just watching the light go out. That is not closure. I am not offering you closure. I do not have closure to give. I am offering you company. You are not the only one who had to learn how to do this without the equipment they gave us. If you have been carrying this, the grief without a name, the one where you lost someone and then lost the last place they still existed, write the words "still here" in the comments. I want to know you are out there, not because it will fix anything, because I am still out there too. Take care of yourselves. I will see you in the next one.